let's speak with Michael Crick, the journalist and broadcaster. Afternoon to you, Michael.
Good afternoon.
It's funny, isn't it? Just that last sentence on Twitter, on Rumble, on Instagram, that sentence would have been meaningless 15 years ago. This is the world we're in, though. This is where business is done.
And it's possible for huge corporations to just turn off the switch. That's it. You're a non-person. And it's a very difficult situation. I mean, he hasn't, none of this has gone to a court of law. It may never go to a court of law.
Yeah.
And he has lost millions. But, we have seen 20 years of Russell Brand, 25 years or however long he's been around. And I thought one of the skills of that Channel 4 programme at the weekend was the way in which they took extracts from his past shows and performances on television and radio and so on, and almost sort of link that with the testimony of the women involved. And of course, Russell Brand first became known to me as an old fogey, way back, when was it, about 16, 17 years ago, when he joked with Jonathan Ross on a show, and they rang up Andrew Sachs, the actor, and joked about Brand sleeping with Andrew Sachs's grandchild. And of course the BBC, that was on the Radio 2, BBC, and the BBC got fined £150,000 by Ofcom for that. But, that is the kind of, man he is. And I think really the world has created, quite aside from the allegations on that programme, which may or may not be true, I think the world created a monster, really. A man, and when a man, has so many followers and is so rich and has scores of women telling him they want to sleep with him and all of this, we build them up into gods. Yeah. And now this particular god has, I can't see how he ever recovers from this, even if there never is a trial.
Well, because even if there's never a trial, and even if all of this goes away, what we are left with is his own admission of his behaviour, which now it's been, if you like, regurgitated. That is seen through a very different light today. I mean, much of it might have been, his new career, if you like, was this YouTube channel, which was doing incredibly well, and some people thought it was crackers, but so what? It's a democracy, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of the stuff he talked about, his book, where he talks about the amount of women he'd slept with, etc., the funny stuff he's done on stage, some of it's a little dark, but it was all under the guise of humour, etc. Now all of that has come back. People can't unsee that. People who'd never even heard that material before are now seeing it. So the big companies, the big production companies who would previously have, bitten off his hand to get him to sign on the dotted line, will no longer do business with him.
I know. I mean, 2 points, really. One is, I think it's partly a change in values. You could get away with making some of those jokes 16 years ago, although it surprises me quite what he got away with, even in a theatre.
That's true.
Even, and especially on television or radio. The values of the world have changed, and Me Too and all of that. But second, I think that there's always been a syndrome, and I first thought about this when I wrote a book about Jeffrey Archer all those years ago, whereby we build up these sort of heroes that we love and adore, and we think they add to the gaiety and colour of life, and they're funny, and so on, and we turn a blind eye to their misdemeanours and their crimes, it's sort of what I call the amiable rogue syndrome. And there are certain people in show business, in politics, you could say actually that Donald Trump and Boris Johnson are the best examples of it, because they're such fun, and they're jokey and colourful. We allow them to get away with things in a way that we don't with ordinary, boring, serious people.
That's true.
Like you and me, or me anyway. But
speak for yourself, Rick.
And we've got to get around that. We've got to actually say, hang on a moment, because we're getting so many stories now where people have been built up into sort of being gods. And you can imagine, if you're in that situation and you've got all the money you want in the world and you're famous and everybody's flocking to you and television producers are begging you to be on their shows, you can just imagine how in that situation you will be tempted to think, I can get away with anything.
Yeah. I remember Boy George saying in an interview, what was the most dangerous thing about being really famous in the 1980s? He was world famous. And he said, and it was brilliant, he said, nobody says no. And he said it didn't matter what it was. You could wake up on a Saturday morning and say, book me flights first class to Australia and get me a car round here now. And the car could turn up and you go, I've changed my mind. You had that sort of power. Yeah. And nobody would say
and what appears to have happened here from the coverage by Channel 4 and the Times and Sunday Times is that, you know, there must have been hundreds of women who didn't say no and who were very satisfied with their relationships with Russell Brand, even if they only lasted a night. Yeah. But what you've got here, if you've got some, and we don't know how many there are. I mean, it's a handful that have come forward, but now others are coming forward who did say no, and the story they tell is suggesting that Brand wouldn't accept them saying no in those circumstances. But I mean, a lot of this is clearly Brand himself is accused of huge culpability. But I think there's an element here that we've got to ask ourselves in the media: are we contributing to that creation of these monsters, really, these monstrous gods? And if you look at some of the coverage, some of it appeared in the programme of sort of fawning TV and radio presenters. The fact they've got an interview with Brand, it's wonderful. Yeah. And you saw it again last night on Newsnight with Jeremy Paxman and a couple of interviews he did. I think we contribute to this in a way. We can't just sort of say it's all down to him. It's a bit like in the world of football. You've got, my own club, Manchester United, has got these young players who've got into trouble for serious sex allegations against them. But you think, well, hang on, they're young, they're incredibly well paid, they're absolutely local stars, and it's the whole. We've got to think through how we maintain standards of behaviour in those circumstances. Maybe we've got to start saying, well, we don't pay people too much, or we've got to be a bit less adulatory in our treatment of these people.
You do get given that the ultimate wide berth on these kind of things. But there is another aspect to this, though.
I mean, the astonishing thing in the Channel 4 programme was, I thought, the production staff, young women production staff, who at the end of the live shows were told to pick various women out of the audience and get their phone numbers, and so that Brand could have them and set up a relationship. And how one of them said, we were pimping for him.
That is extraordinary.
And the production company knew this, and indeed at one stage a line had to be put into Brand's contract that he promised not to sleep with anybody. I shouldn't laugh I'm falling for it myself. It was put into his contract. He wouldn't sleep with anybody on the production team,
which is extraordinary. And even if that isn't, that might not be illegal behaviour, but today that would be. You hear it in the cold light of day, and people retelling that, so it sounds horrendous. Just very briefly, Michael, because we haven't got long. Having said all of this, there has been no criminal trial. The man has not been arrested. He completely denies all of these allegations, and that's his absolute right to do that. And he's made that clear through his own channels. Are you uncomfortable, though, with the idea that a YouTube or whoever can just switch you off like that because they disagree with something?
I am, because there aren't many of these new modern media that you...
No, you haven't got a great choice to go elsewhere.
No, and it's a bit like the story we had a few weeks ago, actually, of the banks cutting off people's bank accounts. Though that was more serious, I think, than this. In those circumstances, it's up to the individual to find new outlets. And in a way, I suppose it's akin to 25, 30 years ago, there were a limited number of newspapers you could work for, or there were a very limited number of television channels. Sure. There used to be. So actually, the media world is more plurality in it now than there was. But these media organisations are immensely powerful and have been rather slower, I think, than the traditional organisations to close them down.
Indeed. Michael, great to see you.